pod friends, welcoming you to Starville Universe on call. And tonight we've got me, we've got actually Greg Dykehouse, who I've not seen for quite a bit of time, and of course we have Gary, which is awesome to see. And is Russ? Let me just do a quick check. No, we don't have Russ in it, but I know I just actually talked to Dave via email, and he's actually been listening, but he has not been able to be in the chat room. He's been busy with his job, well, another job to make ends meet during this whole COVID pandemic fun that we are currently experiencing. So, Gary, how you doing?
Not too bad. Before we get into anything SFU, I just wanted to make a note that there's a new documentary on Netflix about the origins of video games called High Score. And the opening theme is like stuck in repeat in my head. So if there's anyone out there who's... and actually, you might notice that the guy who narrates the series has a bit of a video game connection of his own.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I'll see if I can. I'll look that up, and then maybe I'll actually watch it.
But to refer to the SFU, apologies if I risk derailing your carefully curated plans for the evening. But Steve Cole just recently posted the latest worksheet for Captain's Log 54.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I know.
I thought, yeah.
Well, the reason I know that's because a week ago he already asked me for articles, and I need to sit down and start creating articles. So that's why.
But there are a few interesting items on the list if you wanted to take a quick look through before jumping into anything else, or whichever way around you prefer to do things.
Sure. That wouldn't be a bad thing to start with that. And before we do that, I wanted to say hello to Greg. How you doing, Greg?
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
Get SFB online back up and running. So
understood that.
Apparently, yeah. So
yeah.
Then saw that the new Star Sapphire. I have no idea what the name is.
Star Sapphire tournament. Yes.
Star Sapphire tournament's going to be starting up. So encourage people to join that.
Yep.
I think I'll hop in and see if I can remember how to play this game anymore.
Understood. We've had some. I think Bill Scheller was actually a part of the last one. Obviously, we have Peter Bakia. I'm sure he's going to be part of this one. And is there any other people that you might know off the top of my head? Don't remember.
That was not me crying. That was my dog.
Yep. Greg, I just looked at your post. That is exactly the error that people are getting because of antivirus.
Okay.
Normally, what they have to do is they have to uninstall the client, that they had just installed. Then turn off antivirus, then install the client.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take your show talking through it.
Oh, understood. But I just wanted to mention that because I've seen that. I've already gotten 3 or 4 emails about exactly that situation.
But I don't have JDK9 on my machine. I only got 1.8. So.
Well, it doesn't really matter because the thing is, what's happening is there's a JDK embedded in the executable itself. And the antivirus says, oh no, it's a JVM. It shouldn't be part of an executable. But so it removes those pieces that are required to run the JVM because it thinks it's malicious, and it's not malicious.
All right, I'll try and do that.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you. I will be muted.
Okay. And cups. Okay. Double Joker edition. Okay. The worksheet. let's bring up the worksheet just real quick. Okay. So on the worksheet, of course, got the normal stuff. Fiction, it's going to be called Return of the Darwin. That should be an interesting story. The Darwin being the Global Galactic Survey Cruiser. Correct? Gary, that's the one that actually went through time, right?
Well, one thing I might also suggest is on the spreadsheet, if you go over to the other side, there's like a name that's listed for each particular item that's in there. So, for example, your section for SFB Online, or, well, SFU Online at this point, I guess, has Franz on there. And, of course, most of the pages has SVC or SBP, but you might see a few other names on there, too.
Yeah, like there's one that says, Carney. I wonder who that could be. Says under the history and fiction, Return to Darwin. You know, I wonder who this person is.
Well, I'm sure the mystery will resolve itself once the issue's in print.
I got a funny feeling about that one. Yeah, I got to find out what I wrote up in the last Captain's Log. Given that currently Captain's Log no longer has a standard schedule, to me, it just makes things a little more difficult for me because of I can't say, okay, well, this definitely going to have, I have to make sure that I report this, and this. This is if I want to talk about any changes that have happened to the client, anything else that's happening when it comes to SFB Online, what happened from the last one to this one? I don't know. I got to go back in the history of what I have talked about in the past. When it comes to features to the client, if there's any that's been added, things like that. It's like, so it's a bit of work for me,
Well, didn't you say that the Andromedans, you've started adding the support for that for FedCom? So that could be a thing. That's
already the Andromeda support is added to FedCom. It's got the support like the SFB has support, in that there's certain things that currently I don't support, just because too difficult. It's one of those things. It's only for the Andromedans, and personally, I don't think the situation occurs that often. And that is the situation where you have a satellite ship inside of a mothership that, at that point, gets damaged. Because then you have to have it so that that the satellite ship can actually get damaged while it's in the hangar bay of the ship, that kind of stuff, which the client doesn't handle, just because of it's really complicated, and I don't think there's many times that ever occurs.
So what you're saying is that everyone who's listening who plays FedCom Online, they should go do that so that you get your head exploded.
Yes, exactly. Because if I get that many people playing the Andromedans, I will do it. If I get enough people who actually play the Andromedans and can point out all the issues with the Andromedans, including that one, I'll fix it. I'll work on it. But first, you have to play them. So I have to put the Andromeda. I probably need to. There's probably some bugs in there. I did my best, but that's always the problem with doing a developer and having a developer do his own testing, is that he'll miss stuff. That's why you always need testers. But it looks like we got a primer for the Zosman coming up. Oh, a new is that a new trend? Is that a new one, or is that just an updated one? Which is the tarantula.
I think it's basically inventing a bunch of new monsters, like to roll out into various issues of Captain's Log. So I think it's a new one.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, while you're there, you should have a look in the FC column, FC rows, I should say.
Right. Well, before I get to there, I just noticed there's another one, which is Sims versus Andros. Simulator races versus Andros. I assume that's what it's talking about, which would be interesting. Because the thing is, with the simulator races are designed for the simulators of the different empires, from the ISC to the Romulans to the Federation. The idea was that they would simulate different tactics and strategies, and so have people who are in the academy thinking outside the box, and preparing themselves for, like, of course, the IC had the barbarians, and they had different option mounts that you could fit with different weapons. The whole idea was just to allow the people at the academy, for that empire, to, in this case IC, that I'm talking about, to test their skills, tactics. They know the weapons. They don't know all the ships very well, but this gives them one ship that they can put all whatever weapons they want to put on there. So to me, that's why it's like Sims versus Andros. So you got the different simulator races, which are fake races, quote unquote fake races, from these different empires for their own training. Now you have that versus the Andromedans. Huh? It seems weird to me. But the FedCom, yeah, I see they have gunboats attack, which they'll be talking about. I assume with gunboats attack, it's going to be like a preview of the actual product itself, which I think.
Well, I do.
Let me just finish real quick. But I think going with gunboats attack, I think it's an awesome idea. And you're gonna say something, Gary?
Oh yeah. I haven't seen anything from this one, but I remember in the previous. It might have been in CL53. They were talking about how they might give the gunboats, because you give them a move cost of 1/5 in
right.
FedCom, because that doesn't really work. So we're saying something about a move cost of 1/8 instead.
Right.
So I don't know if that's actually going to be the case when we see it, but I'll look forward to it, because also I'd be curious to see how the rules can be modified to represent the Omega gunboats as well, because they use that volatile warp system. It's kind of like a budget Orion afterburner-y kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, we'll see what happens there. But yeah, it's interesting, because the thing, although we were talking about it before, but I think the next project will still be X ships attack.
Right.
But I suppose in the long run it'd be interesting to see, because like in Module X1R you've got the X Raiders and stuff, where so maybe in the long run there'd be a chance to support those in FedCom. I don't know, but it'd be nice to see.
Right. That's one of the things that I added to the client, which is support for the X ships, which actually I told Christopher Nunzi, who is Newsy, about that, because he's helped me with the ship definitions, and that was one of the things that he really wanted to do. So it's like, okay, well, great. I finally got around to adding it. Support is out there with the latest client, so that people can now add. And I just need to have people add ships that have those weapons. And the one thing I have to point out to Christopher, and possibly Sebastian, I'm not sure, but I'll probably have Sebastian do work on some of them too. And that is that you need to have it so you select the X weapons for the X ships. You don't have to worry about the batteries, because X ships, all batteries hold 3 points of power, and you just have to say, okay, this ship is an X ship, and then the batteries automatically they hold 3 points of power per box at that point. So there's for that system, you don't have to have a special X ship battery, and I see no reason to do the whole X1R thing. I really don't see it. which I'm sorry. I don't think we've talked about X1R that much. So I just want to tell you about that, which is X1R. Basically, the whole idea of the X-ship technology being integrated into non-X ships. So it's kind of a partial X-ship refit kind of idea. And no. No,
I agree. I mean, I definitely wouldn't want to see partial X. But what I meant is that some of the actual ships in X1R, like for example, the Romulans have Sparrowhawk they have a Sparrowhawk EX and a Firehawk EX, and they use them to hunt Andromeda and RTN nodes.
Right.
So, in theory, it'd be interesting to see like what those kind of ships, like once we have both X ships attack and gunboats attack, maybe they could do like an X Raiders attack product where you get those kind of ships, and you could throw in something like the Federation GSX or something like that as well. Just you know, but you know, whether or not people would actually want that is another story. So.
Yeah. We'll just have to wait and see. Let's see how the products sell, and of course the big question is going to be when it comes to those FedCom products is this, and that is, will ADB be selling the physical cards? You know, the physical laminated cards. Or were they just...
Well, not initially, at least for X-Ships Attack, but I think they're still looking into it. So it's not entirely off the table just yet. But I guess it's a case of, well, not just the cards, but I guess it's also a case of getting the counters done as well, because they were talking about various negotiations that are ongoing. So
right, I understand the whole issue.
Keep our fingers crossed for that one.
And the thing is, I totally understand when it comes to the counters, because counters are a heck of a lot more, in my mind, are harder than the cards because of the thick cardboard that's involved, and it's a heck of a lot more expensive than is for the card stock that they need for the ship cards. Now, I don't know how they currently created the ship cards. If they had a third party who actually printed out the cards, cut them up if they need to be cut up, basically print the cards, cut them up, and then laminate them individually. I'm not sure if they use the third party or that ADB, would get the SIP cards, then they cut them up, and then create then laminate them themselves. I'm not sure. My guess it's number one, and not the former versus the latter, basically.
Well, from what I gather, I mean the facilities they have on site. I mean they have a black and white print on demand thing, so they can do everything in the issue short of the cover. But when it comes to things like FedCom, I mean I don't know for sure, but I would be surprised if like the order didn't have them like pre-cut and pre-laminated when they arrive. But I don't know. You'd have to ask ADB that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then we have the shipyard showing off some obviously, big surprise, FedCom gunboats. Is one of also some, looks like it says SFB non-alpha. Looks like I wonder who this person is. Gary, I don't know who that is. Actually, I don't know who it is.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
But look at the note just beside that person's name.
Yeah, Paravians. Which should be interesting. Can't wait to see it. Especially because it's non-alpha. Because who was it? I think actually there was a Facebook post about it. And that is that they were pointing out on Facebook that the alpha octant, when it comes to the number of ships, you've basically filled up almost every nook and cranny that you could possibly do for alpha ships. I forget I didn't read through the whole thread after the person posted that, but when they said that, it rang definitely very true to me. Of course, I have a minor issue with Facebook at the moment, and that is that unfortunately, I'm considered one of the ADB admins. So if I do a reply, the Facebook automatically replies me as Amarillo ADB. It's like, no, I'm not ADB. I want to reply as myself, as Paul Franz, so that people don't get confused that I'm actually speaking for ADB and I'm not. They just gave me the access. Basically, they did that way back when they first set up the Facebook page and all that kind of thing, just to have a backup, someone that they trusted that could in a pinch help them out if they lost access from wherever they are. Now, for I know, they might no longer need that because I think Steve Cole has access, but they say don't you dare touch it. And of course we have Gene, so I'd have to check with ADB if they still want to keep me on as an admin to that stuff. Because overall, personally, I find it very annoying because I get all these notifications which are for ADB and their stuff, which I don't really monitor. It's not my job to monitor and keep things going on it. That's Gene's. But since I'm an admin, I'm automatically notified of all this stuff. So it is very annoying. And preview of R4T, I'm not sure what that is. And then we have
R4T is basically going to have a bunch of new Tholian ships. And
okay.
The other one is called Shadows of the Empire or something like that.
Okay. That's what that SOTE is.
Shadows of the Empire is like a what if the Romulans had figured out warp by themselves.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I'm seeing Starmada is for Daniel Cast. And the note is Frankenships. So it's like, okay. So I assume what's going to be maybe some of the Starmada ships or some of the weird ships, like maybe the B10, B10T, or one of the anarchist kind of ships, i.e. The TK5, or the
or maybe the Fraley cruiser.
The Fraley cruiser, that's something. Which the funny part about the Fraley is actually you can remember, because I'll be honest, I don't read through every single page of the captain's logs, and you might actually read a lot more than I do. And that is, have they actually created an empire called the Fraley? Even it's just goofball, something that they posted in captain's log and that's it.
Well, they exist as a species in the Federation, in Prime Directive Federation, so they're real. And
oh man,
the Fraley, basically what it is that like how the various major planets have their own national guards, like Terra and Vulcan and Doria and so forth.
Yeah.
So in the modern era, they no longer use their own built ships. So because in the early years, like for example, like when Starfleet was created, the Vulcans retained their own ships for the Vulcan fleet, but then in the Y120s, when everyone moved on to the modern era, the Vulcans and Andorians and so forth, they used the hand-me-downs from the early year Starfleet. So they're still saucer in the shell ships, but they can't go faster than Speed 24. So the Fraley, they had a more kind of creative way of going about things. So what they did is that they basically acquired scraps and spare parts from various run-down ships or wrecks or whatever, and they welded them together basically to create like a Frankenship.
Right. Well, that just, I could have sworn there was a race, or I'm going to say race at the moment. Actually, no. The race I'm thinking about, actually, what they did is it wasn't ships. It was parts. Parts of people that they kept on replacing of themselves to stave off the phage.
Oh, that's in the franchise. That's the Vidians. They're in Star Trek Voyager.
Yes, yeah, I know it's in Star Trek. I know it's not in the original series. It was in the Next Generation. I think that was Next Generation.
Is Voyager.
Oh, it was in Voyager.
Because they're over in the Delta Quadrant.
Ah, yeah, right. You're right. It's been so long since I watched Voyager, and actually, I really enjoyed. I enjoyed Voyager, though. I stopped watching them before the series ended, so I didn't actually see like the ending of the series and how they wrapped it up. And because I might recall correctly, I remember them hearing about them actually coming home. I think I saw bips and bleeps of that. That's about it. You know, somehow they found a quick way to actually get home, which was the whole idea of Voyager. I mean, when it comes to the series. So, and this is a weird one for me anyway, which is the Zinti destroyers in the shipyard. It says Zinti DDs.
Sometimes what happens is because you know the way like they're continually working on the various Master Starship books.
Right.
So I think what happens is that each time one of the Starship books is done, in the process of them doing it, they basically see a need or at least a potential place for a set of ships, either to kind of support the launch of it or just to kind of fill gaps or whatever that maybe might have been perceived. So that's because I think in the past they've done similar things with I don't know if it was Lyran or Gorn or LDR or something like that. They had like other kind of ships and stuff, whatever, that were basically the write-ups for them were put into the Master Starship book, and the actual SSDs ended up in the next captain's log to tie into that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Looks like Steve Cole is going to be writing up a little bit of history about the tanks of SFU, which I'm hoping that he goes into some of the different empires. Tanks of some of the different empires. Either that or because as was pointed out, well, it came to light anyway in my mind, when they actually did the different counters that you can currently buy on the e-tailers, Warehouse 23, Drive-Through RPG, and Wargame Vault, that that you can download as a PDF of the counter sheets, which is quite cool. And that is the different silhouettes that are used for the different counters, and how the different vehicles look different. They might overall have the same kind of stats, but even on a broad term, if their stats are the same, they might look different. They might actually, in the small, if let's say in the case of Prime Directive, if you're actually doing a Prime Directive thing where a tank from a certain empire is involved, there's little idiosyncrasies that are different between tanks on how that empire, when it comes to design, that they have different, for if not for nothing else, the number of people I'll say people. Let's just say people. I'll just go creatures, but that's not. I don't think that's quite a nicer term. Let's just say people could fit in a tank at one time. That's why the whole idea of when it comes to squadrons in Starfleet Marines, the products, the product Starfleet Marines, that the counters, they're all worth the same, no matter what the empire is. And as was pointed out in the rules of Starfleet Marines, and that is that in the case of Gorns, there might be a squadron, there might be 3 because of how strong they are and so forth, versus a squadron may be made up of 6 individuals of humans, and therefore the relative strength and defense are the same. that whole idea. So as I said, in the global terms, overall, it's very generic, and that works fine. But in the small, where you actually little details about, okay, how the tanks are designed, what they look like, and things like that is different. Now that's one thing that I think it's bothered me, and I know it's bothered some other people, and that is when it comes to originally, and when it comes to Starfleet battles, each empire had their own idea of what was needed when it comes to fill in the different roles that were needed from what a frigate was, what a destroyer was, what a cruiser was made up of. What all these things were different. They're different. They were actually, and if you looked at the BPVs could be wildly different between each empire. Even if they're both marked, okay, this is a command cruiser. Well, this command cruiser might be worth 130. This command cruiser might be worth 170. It's like, why is that? Well, it's because of that was the philosophy of that empire. They have what they consider a cruiser, which is more like a heavy frigate, or along those lines, or a cruiser that's more like a dreadnought, or a dreadnought that's more like a cruiser. I'm just thinking about the Tholians came to mind. Their original dreadnought that they made up of basically pieced together PC hulls, and that was more like a heavy battle cruiser when it comes to the BPV of it, compared to, the Federation dreadnought, which was worth over 200 and had a lot more firepower, so. As they say, don't get me
If only
started.
there was a part of the galaxy that still does that.
What's that?
If only there was a part of the galaxy that still does that.
I know. It'd be nice to know. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't finish that thought, and I apologize. And that is that the problem was, and there was a moment in time in ADB, back. I think they were still, Task Force Games were still their publisher, and they didn't self-publish at that point. So where basically they're putting out these like the heavy war destroyers, and things like that, where there was basically we had the whole complaint, which is cookie cutterism. All the ships are worth of a heavy war destroyer are all worth approximately the same, maybe 1 or 2 points different. And the whole idea was not to actually build these things into fleets and incorporate them into fleets, but have it so people can do, one-on-one battles. It's like, what's the point then? It's cookie cutter. It's boring. If, in my mind, as soon as you have each empire quote unquote has to have this ship to fill the role. It's like, no, it doesn't. You might have a different ship that fills that same role. Why? So it's just one of the things that it bugs me. So that's it. That's finishing my thought for those who said, "Oh, we're waiting for that part," especially those people who rant about the cookie cutterism that happened later on.
Well, the funny thing is about the heavy war destroyers is that, especially once you start throwing X technology into the mix, because there's a bunch of X heavy war destroyers that are in X1R, and it's actually quite interesting because, say for example, if you look at say the ISC. Now, they have the same thing that other plasma empires have, where, like, for non-X ships, you have to have a size class 3 ship to fit a plasma S, or PPD for that matter. So, and even like when they look at the X technology. I mean, they can fit. Some empires can upgrade their plasma Gs to plasma S or X or whatever it is. But the ISC one only still has 2 plasma Ls on the front, so it's quite weak in terms of its plasma output.
Right.
So, but for around the same price, or just a little bit more BPV wise, you can get a modified fast patrol ship tender that has 2 NTORPs, and that's a lot better, especially if you want to go hunting RTN nodes. So that empire, it's, well, I mean, whatever they can cobble together, given like the beating that they get in the early part of the invasion, they basically, it stands out more. But then if you look at the Federation, the Feds don't really have a proper light cruiser that is X technology, because the DDX is it's like a pocket NCL on the one hand, and then they have full-on new X heavy cruisers on the other. So the only ship that really fits in between is their heavy war destroyer. But the handy thing about the Feds is that the Photon is just as good no matter what size ship you put it on. So they can use basically, well, it wouldn't be a PF tender unless it's in the dark future. But in the standard timeline, you could basically stick a pair of special sensors and 4 F-111s and use it as almost like a pocket version of the GVX. Mm-hmm. And the ship itself is still, it's not bad as light cruisers go, X-light cruisers go, but it can certainly hold its own a lot better than like the ISC or some of the other ones can. So it almost basically becomes their light cruiser by default. So I guess if you think about it, I mean, we don't know yet in terms of Federation and Empire how many of these things are getting built. But right. I'd like to think that the Feds build a lot more of them than anyone else because A, they have to, and B, they get more benefit out of it than other empires do.
Yeah, to a certain degree, I would say that's probably true, and obviously the Federation probably has the largest economy of all of the empires. Obviously the Klingons have a pretty large one, but I think that here's the gotcha. Here's the gotcha on all of when the X ships come into play. And that is, if you think historically, when do the X ships come into play? They come into play after years and years and years of war. That means that, the borders have been fluid. Any manufacturing facilities that were even close to the border, ever was even close to the front lines, most probably were destroyed as as the if you had to be, if you're being pushed back, you're not going to want to have those manufacturing facilities available to your enemy. You're going to destroy them. You might not glass the planet, but you're going to destroy any kind of manufacturing. And at the very least, and given that, if you push it back to more of the core worlds of the Federation, you still have the problem with manufacturing when it comes to resources. And there's resources, ebbing and flowing, and possibly not having the resources to actually create the X ships. So, the whole idea of exhaustion from how long the general war had been going on, and overall economic exhaustion because of all the money that was put forward towards the war effort. So, given that, I think that is part of what would limit how many ships are created when it comes to X ships, because of when it comes to you're waiting for whether it's the Klingons or the Romulans or this new threat ISC come streaming over your border. If you can build yourself, a few, two or three destroyers in the same amount of time that you can build one X ship, you might just create 3 destroyers to help protect, that can better and more quickly protect what you've got, and so I think that, to me, that's really the limiting factor there. Obviously, as I mentioned, it's possible that they might have created more X ships because they had the possibility of, at the very least, a more broad economic base. But let's have to wait and see. Because in my mind, the whole idea of having lots of X ships, I mean, that early on, is just nuts. The whole idea is that they had a few X ships because even the ISC didn't have that many X ships. And so so you're always integrating at least the first generation X ships and the general warships. The X ships were just stronger and they could fight better, but still there were only one ship or a couple ships, a part of this huge of a larger fleet. And I understand that they were really good for RTN hunting, but you already got ships out there which are, if you have them work together, can work as a good RTN squadron, hunting squadron, and not have to put possible risk of these really expensive X ships which you'd prefer to use for other purposes. Especially because of the big thing is, of course, what's one of the big things for the X ships, and that's going to be the fast movement. So.
Well, there's a couple of things I might say about that. Okay, so one of it is in Federation and Empire, once you start getting X ships deployed, there's a certain proportion of your EPs that are automatically translated into XTPs. And you can, but you don't have to use those to basically pay towards building or converting X or X bases or whatever. And although it is true that for most of the empires you've got the problem of economic exhaustion, but think of it like this: it's true. I mean, it's also true that by the end of the General War there are very few X ships around, except the ISC they've managed to build up 2 full echelons worth, and we're working on a third by the time the Andros showed up. But they were at peace, so they had the luxury of being able to do it without anyone else stopping them. So, and it's also in terms of logistics, because one of the things it points out in Module X1R is that if you have an X technology heavy war destroyer and you want to change its mission, you can only do that at a base that itself supports X technology.
Yep.
So, say for example, if you have an X battle station or an X fleet repair dock or whatever it is. So, actually, I'm not sure if an FRX can do that, but anyway. Now, of course, during the General War, you're right. Also, there are very few of those. I mean, usually the capital starbase for each of the empires gets kind of like a free upgrade to X technology in F&E terms. Although in reality, someone's paying for it. But it takes a while for this sort of thing to happen. But if we look at the Feds, for example, now the war comes to an end in spring 185. And the ISC show up, according to ISC War, they start showing up about a year or so later, a year and a half. And they're not necessarily, I mean, there's, clashes, I guess, between individual ISC forces and Federation forces and stuff. But by and large, the Feds are still at peace, so they're still in a position where they try to burn off the exhaustion. And even though the Andromedans start attacking the ISC in like late Y188, early Y189, they don't go to war, quote unquote. Well, I mean, they are launching raids in the Federation, but not basically at the same kind of a nuisance level as pirates. So they don't really get serious against the Feds until Y192. So that's another 8 to 10 turns worth in which the Feds are able to try to nurse their economy back to health. And it is also noted in ISC wars that, because in Federation and Empire, the standard rules, it takes a certain length of time for an empire, once their war is over, to try to get back to normal in terms of getting rid of their economic exhaustion. But they seem to be setting it up so that when Andro War comes out, that rate will be quicker than usual, because basically, like, all those work boats, like, for example, historically, there's like thousands of PF or gunboats that were lying spare at the end of the war, not in Federation space, but in other empires. Mm-hmm. And those boats, many of them were basically being demilitarized and turned into workboats. And then crews, often the same crews that commanded them in wartime, they're basically given tricorders with prospector equipment and stuff, and said, "Go find germanium, go find all these things that we need for the X economy." And so there's basically a fresh wave of prospectorism and stuff, whatever, that's taking place. And There's like other things going on in terms of the reformation of the various economies. So that the sum total of it is that by the time the invasion basically hits the Federation, they'll be in a somewhat better position to be, able to support X technology. But even so, they then have to basically face the issue where, because even during the worst of the General War, they were usually able to basically have safe areas, like either in the survey area towards the Galactic Core, or in the areas around the core worlds, like where the Klingons or Romulans didn't quite make it that far. But and so they would have issues of things like Orion piracy and so forth, or the occasional space monster.
True.
But it was reasonably reliable that the goods would get from those colonies to Earth or Vulcan or whatever, so that they can turn those goods into starships. And but of course, the Andromedans make things go very different. So they are actually in a position to try to strangle that trade. So yes, that is also true. But so there are definitely all these things. Like, I mean, there's probably certain limitations and stuff when it comes to how many X ships are being built. But I will point one thing out, though, is that X ships actually are really important for RTN hunting, because if a ship with special sensors on it is scanning a region of space to find a satellite base, it has to be alone. It has to be basically far enough away from friendly ships that they can't, like, they have to call on them to come for help, but they won't arrive right away. So it's actually quite possible that the scanning ship will have to go by itself to reach the base in time, because the other thing too is that the Andromedans have an option where they can basically order a mothership that's maybe 3 or 4 nodes away, send it to that base, and then disassemble it or pack it up or whatever, and then scoot off and place it somewhere else, and you have to start all over again, even if it's only like a few parts, not that far away. Like, it could be in the same hex in F&E terms, but there's like thousands, if not millions, of star systems in every hex. So they could just put it in the one next over, and you'd still have to start over in terms of scanning it. And also, if your ship is relatively weak, and you go in and you try to stop the base from being moved, the Andro could just destroy you, and then you'll no longer have the ability to stop it. So that's one of the reasons why the X-Raiders, or for the Federation, the X-Survey Cruisers, became so important, because they were fast enough to get to the base and powerful enough to either destroy a weak base or hold up the reinforcements long enough so that the Andromedan reinforcements, I should say, hold them up long enough so that the Allied reinforcements could get there to destroy the base. So there is that sort of thing. And also because of the Feds, they don't have the same options in terms of, like, for example, the Romulans can use X-ship versions of their Sparrowhawk fast patrol ships or tenders, or the Klingons have the T5PXs and so on. But then, on the other hand, as I say, they have those advanced survey cruisers, and they've got better options with the heavy war destroyer than other empires have. So, finding the money to pay for all these ships, of course, I'm sure that's part of the whole challenge when Andro War actually shows up. But even with all those things, I'd say we kind of double back to the point where I think I would guess, at least, that we'll probably see more of the Fed HWXs than anyone else for some of these reasons. So I don't know. I mean, like, as you say, we'll have to wait and see. But
Understood. Yeah. Some of that, the idiosyncrasy of the economics and the timeline that, as you pointed out, basically we'll have to wait for Federation Empire to come out when it comes to the Andromedan War to see how that was resolved, basically.
Although, actually, there is one little tidbit that you might find interesting, because in ISC War, they mentioned that even though the ISC itself is not quote-unquote at war, it's spent, by the time the pacification begins, in F&E terms, they've spent 10 terms of a wartime economy, because for any empire except for the ISC, the Feds, and for the major empires like Lyrans or Xintis, whatever, you usually get 10 turns in F&E terms. before the early part of economic exhaustion sets in. Now, the Fed's Klingons on the ISC get 15 turns, so that's about 7.5 years, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, say, for example, like the pacification begins in spring Y186. So 10 turns, well, that would be spring Y181. And then by the time the campaign is over, like the invasion begins, that would be like near, I guess, some point in Y188, or maybe, let's say it's autumn Y188. So that's 5 turns after that. So even if the invasion hadn't happened, the ISC would basically start to have to worry about themselves being economically exhausted just to try to maintain the pacification. So now they're still way ahead in terms of where everyone else is, but it basically, if the pacification had continued, they probably wouldn't have been able to keep it up indefinitely. And since we know it didn't, we know that any efforts that they would have had to try and respond to the invasion in terms of building new ships or whatever like that, they're basically going to struggle, because even at the beginning of the invasion, they're going to have economic exhaustion to worry about. So, and that's above all the issues of having, like, you know, a vast number of their ships in other people's empires. So, you know.
Well, that was actually one of the scenarios that was, I forget where I read it, where I think it was it was one of the scenarios where the Andromedans were attacking the ISC. I'm trying to think about where I read it.
It's in Module X1R. It's basically, it shows the Andromeda 2 Dominators attacking the home planet of the Corlivalar. They're like the cat people of the ISC. Right.
And yeah, and they had the X-Ship Squadron. You know, was it something of Justice from the IC?
Echelon of Judgment.
They're
the same ones who destroyed the Hive Ship. They're the same ones who destroyed the Saltorian Hive Ship. Because the Echelon of Justice, they're the ones that defeated the Romulans when they intervened in the Romulan Civil War.
Dang. But yeah, the whole high-speed run from across the known galaxy, the known octant, to try to get back in time to help, save them, basically. Which
so, of course, if you're talking about the Darwin, you have to make sure that you're not mixing up your meaning for the term back in time.
True. Very true.
But yeah, you're actually right, because in Module C3A, they have the scenario featuring the fall of Demarak, like the LDR capital. And they've got more or less a complete order of battle for what the LDR had. And you're right, even of course, they're only a minor empire. They're like one province. But even at that point, they only had, like, I think 5 or 6 X ships. They had an X battle station as well. But yeah, like they apparently there's a lot of corruption in the LDR at that time. So there were debates as to, like, should they build fewer yet more powerful X ships, or should they build more but cheaper ones?
Yep. Well, no, they were still wiped out. So, I guess it doesn't really matter. As they say, it's water under the bridge. But yeah, so I think that pretty much covers everything for the captain's log at the moment. Yeah, nothing else really sticks out at me. Those look like snapshots. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure we will find out about that.
Which one?
It's in the history section. It says snapshots, and I'm assuming that these are basically short stories, is what I'm assuming is what it is.
Well, usually in previous issues, sometimes they can be like historical monographs as well. So it'd either be like, kind of like, you're right, because I mean, like they could either be like just one page of fiction or one page of, here's a story about X, Y, Z, or whatever. So.
Exactly. So,
because I think they did have something about an issue or two ago. They talked about, I think Gene actually might have written it. It was about the what happened when the ISC learned about the Romulans and Gorns and how they basically responded as an empire to this revelation. I mean, basically trying to like gain intelligence on their new neighbors before they actually reveal themselves.
right. Yeah, because I just remember reading about how, the IC saw these two, they were just, they were out exploring, known space. And then they run into these two people that are just constantly fighting. And they look, watch the battles from a distance and just say, what the heck are they, and just finally realize how insane these guys were. It's like, why are you doing this? And then find out the whole galaxy is full of them. Of course, then they decide, oh, we're going to impose peace on in the whole universe and see how that worked out.
Well, the irony is that one of the reasons, because they figured out early on that the Romulans were like way more aggressive than the Gorns, but they learned about the Paravian destruction, like the Sun Snake, whatever, destroying the Paravian home system.
Right.
And basically, they figured that, well, the Gorns had done it. I mean, they might have been sorry about it, but it happened because it wasn't really the Gorns' fault. But
right.
The Gorns blamed themselves.
They were trying to protect themselves in a non-violent manner by blockading, the Paravian homeworld. And what happens? A nasty monster, a sun snake, dives into the sun and supernovas the homeworld, and they're gone.
Or so they thought. Dun dun dun.
Dun dun
but,
dun. Yeah.
Of course, when the irony is that according to Module C6, had the Parabians survived as an empire, then they would have completely disabused the ISC of the whole War Equals Peace thing decades before, because in the alternate timelines, they're sending ships towards the galactic rim, try to find more resources to fight the Gorns, and they run into this ship that has these strange lizard people on them. And since, of course, all lizards, they think all lizards are demons, they destroy the ship, and suddenly they're at war with the IC. And then the IC are like, what are these people doing? And they're like, the whole idea of War People's Peace kind of like gets stuck in the pocket. But the flip side of that is that they end up basically part of the alliance with the Gorns and eventually with the Federation as well. So.
Yes, the whole world is crazy. In this case, the whole universe. Of course, that's the whole idea of the game. Is conflict, which, that always is the question. Can you actually achieve peace through conflict? And the answer is no. Conflict begets conflict. At some point both sides have to say, this is ridiculous, and step back from it all, which I think is part. Obviously one of the things that was pointed out was that because of the economic exhaustion, that a lot of the empires are going, whoa, we can't keep this up. Excuse me, I've got this guy. One of my cats. For those on the video, they've got to see my cat. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What were we going to say?
Well, one thing I think is interesting is that when you think about the aggressor empires in Alpha, like the Romulans, Praevians, if they exist, in Alpha, I should say, and Klingons and so forth, Lyrans, and Xindi too, let's be honest, is that for the Romulans, for them, it's like they're obsessed with the idea of empire, because they don't have that many planets, and they don't really have proper subject species. But I mean, even running their own a country is like herding cats. Don't tell the Lyrans that. But they basically still have this. I mean, the whole reason why they exist as exiles from Vulcan is because they didn't want to give up the idea of conquering the galaxy. So they're but they don't really seem to have like a sense of what they're actually doing. So it's almost like the Joker in The Dark Knight. He's what's his something about you wouldn't know what to do. It's like a dog chasing cars, So, like the Romulans, like they're constantly, they can't get over the idea that they're supposed to be the ones in charge.
Right.
But then the Klingons, on the other hand, they're more familiar with the reality of empire. I mean, they were tutored by the old kings. Well, they say they'd be tutored because they want to try to put it in a more favorable light. But I mean, it's fair. I mean, the old kings didn't subjugate them. I mean, they didn't help them as much as the Klingons wanted, but they probably helped them more than they planned to in the first place. And I mean, the Klingons. I mean, yes, they're happy to conquer. I mean, they conquered the Hydrants twice, and they're happy to invade if they feel like it's the right option. But they're not obsessed with the idea the way the Romulans are. I mean, they're more like they're happy enough being part of, I guess you could say, the galactic community, in the sense that as long as they're the ones that they get to call the shots, which is probably why they're so annoyed at the Federation, because they can't quite figure out how to get around the fact that the Feds have so much more money than them. So they basically, because it's easier for them to kind of deal with like the Lyrans or Hydrants and stuff. And actually, it's probably good for the Klingons that the Lyrans and Krasintis are so divided with their feudal systems and stuff, because imagine if the Lyrans were like a single empire the way the Klingons are, they would have a much stronger hand to play, like dealing with the Klingons. But because they don't, the Klingons are the senior partner.
That's true.
But so I think those kind of things are interesting. They're like part of what makes the universe so interesting.
Yeah. Well,
but
of course, the question is, what would happen if you switch the Federation and the Klingons? If the Klingons were the more powerful of the two, how would that change the way things look?
Well, there is an alternate timeline where the Klingons get to. Well, it's not really. I don't know if alternate timeline is too strong a word, but there is an alternate scenario in which the Klingons take over. They succeed in taking over the Romulans, and so they actually have at least the equal, if not stronger, economy. But they've got more borders to worry about, because they've got to worry about the Gorns and the ISC as well, I suppose. But what I actually think is interesting is, like, say, for example, if that's when Fed and Empire gets around to doing the Paravians and Carnivons, I think it would be interesting if you could do a variant where you use the same map that they use, the map sheet P, where you have like the ISC, they push the Romulans back, but at the same time, their core provinces are taken over by the Paravians and stuff. So you use that same map, but instead of it being the Romulans, it's actually the Klingons, because they call it the Imperial Klingon Marches. It's like basically they have Viceroy on Romulus, and the IKM is run kind of like as an allied empire of the original empire. So it's almost like during the colonial era, when Spain had a viceroy in Mexico City, and he was there on behalf of the King of Spain, but in reality he was the one in charge because of the logistics involved and stuff. I mean, like, there was no internet back then. His boss couldn't call him on Zoom or Skype or whatever. So
well, come on.
Basically, I mean, yeah. So,
well, come on. That's the one thing that really changed history overall is communication, and how quickly you could communicate with people at a longer distance. Because that's one thing that. If you looked at alternate sci-fi's universes and how they handle that, because of things like I forget what the one I'm thinking of what the universe is called, but basically the whole idea is that all messages are sent via drone. You send a drone through like a warp, kind of a warp gate kind of thing, and it comes out on the other side many weeks later, and so the communication is a lot slower. It's always delayed from what actually is happening at that moment in time, versus what we're used to, which is
universes that are. Oh, sorry.
Which is we're used to instantaneous, communication from any part, to anyone on the world.
Yeah, because in BattleTech they have it where the only ways to communicate are either using courier jump ships, or if you use whatever they're running, the hyperpulse generators. And also each generator only has a range of about 50 light years, so you have to basically daisy chain HPGs in different star systems to be able to send a message further. And then when the dark age hits, 80% of the network goes down. So all the empires that had relied on the HPG network are suddenly screwed. So they have to basically try to figure out alternatives and stuff. And then also, I don't know if you've ever heard of a universe called Old Man's War.
Yes.
It's by an author called Charles Scalzi. They're actually doing a Netflix movie based on it.
I've read that, and that book, The Old Man's War, is fascinating. Though there's certain things I still disagree with when it comes to theologically speaking and so forth. But yeah, the whole idea that the time dilation between the time when they send the ship out to go fight at this distant planet, and by the time they get there, the war has already been over. Is already over. You know.
Well, one of the things as well is that, to go back to BattleTech, I forget the exact details in Old Man's War, but in BattleTech, the safest way to jump through hyperspace, because most ships can only travel about 30 light years safely. Mm-hmm. You usually have your jump points, which are either at the very top of a solar system or the very bottom. But it still takes several days of travel time for your drop ships to basically carry your battle mechs or your aerospace fighters to the planet you want to and back again. Although there are these things called pirate points. So, like, for example, there's certain certain kind of zones that kind of appear like when you look at the various orbits of planets and moons and stuff.
Right, they're called Lagrange points.
You get it right, you can appear there. But if you don't, you smash into the planet. So you basically, but very, very, very few empires do that. But there is basically in the universe kind of like a built-in time delay where it's very difficult to surprise somebody. But at the same time, most of the empires have really crap navies. Like, they don't have proper fixed defenses the way that, like, in the SFU, you'd have, like, ground-based phaser fours and shields and all that kind of stuff, whatever.
Right.
But in the BattleTech, of course, space superiority, it's important, but it doesn't quite play out quite the same way. So, yeah. And also like when it comes to like the courier ships, like your jump ship might appear, but then you still have to send the signal using radio waves or whatever, and then you have to wait whatever minutes or hours for that message to actually reach the planet that's trying to pick it up.
Yep.
It's like trying to get messages from the Voyager 2 or Voyager 1.
Mm-hmm. Oh, understood. There's that whole law of physics thing, and which is, to me, has always been interesting about the sci-fi universes and how they deal with when they're talking about intergalactic, or extra solar system, between solar systems, so that you're traveling through the galaxy. How do you do that? What is the solution that comes up? In the case of Star Trek, the whole idea is you have a warp bubble that that basically is constantly forming, and then you ripple through this, and that's how you travel through space, and that will go faster than the speed of light. Versus, in the case of Star Wars, you're traveling in hyperspace, so you're traveling at a different dimensionality of space, which actually provides shorter distances between point A and point B. You still have the effects of the space outside of that because of you have some minor issues. But still, it might take you days in hyperspace to travel to a far solar system. Depends. And
actually, there's one thing that actually just reminded me of, because I remember in the beginnings of Star, later on in SG-1 Atlantis, ships got way faster, like Earth ships could travel to the Pegasus galaxy and so forth, like in weeks, especially if they had a ZDM, whatever. But in the very earliest season, the Goa'uld had their like pyramid ships, the Hattaks, whatever. But you actually expected, like, they're asking, so how fast is this ship going? And Teal'c says, they can go no faster than 10 times the speed of light or whatever. And then they're surprised when it isn't, because they've managed to speed them up. But when you think about it, even like if you think about the slower speed, it's that basically means that, you know, for all those centuries, whatever, that they were ruling a large portion of the galaxy, their ships were super slow, but the gates weren't. So you're really dependent on the gate network that's already there, because it's really hard to send a ship into a new part of space and place a gate there if your ships are so slow. So there could be thousands of worlds in a given portion of the galaxy that are habitable for humanoid life.
Right.
But you wouldn't know they're there, because if the ancients, whatever, hadn't put stargates on them, then you have to be the one to put a stargate there. And if your ships are so crap, then, you know, is it worth expending that effort when you could be doing something else? So, and that could also be a reason why, because if you have fast ships, then it's easier to put down rebellions, because you can show up on the planet and bombard the peasants or whatever. But if your ships can't do that, then there's much more of an onus than actually putting boots on the ground through the gate and try to maintain a presence that way. So it almost basically makes the initial premise of SG-1 work better, because, like, if the Goa'uld had more advanced technology at the start, then Earth would have been screwed. But because they didn't, the series was able to basically get through the first few years with relatively small teams going through gates and pulling off various missions and stuff.
Right. Oh yeah. Well, again, you know, that's one of those premises, you know, of the whole idea of setting up war gates, whether it's on worlds or in space, you know, to set up a warp gate kind of thing, where you can instantaneously go from point A to point B. I mean, instantaneously, as in like seconds, versus taking years by normal methods. You know, whether even if it is faster than light, you know, that as you point out, it takes a lot of effort to expand those things. You know, but to me, in a universe like that, you'd always be sending out ships, always, because all it does is it helps you build. Because when it comes to resources, to feed a building empire, you always have to be sending out ships to explore farther and farther out to get more and more resources for that. You know, because as you point out, it's going to take a long time to get there. So as soon as you set up one warp gate, you know, set it up, okay, next, and you keep going, you know, and just have it trailing behind you. At some point, you know, obviously, when it comes to SG and Stargate, the Stargate universe, did they actually have, so were some of the Stargates large enough that ships actually could go between points? I.e., were they in space, or was it all just planet to planet?
Okay, so in the Pegasus galaxy in Atlantis, they have some of the gates are in space, because the Wraith, basically what they do is that they send their darts through the gates, and the gate, some of the darts have these kind of, they're not quite transporters, but they can basically dematerialize a victim and then store them and then rematerialize them so they can feed them. But then also the ancients had these things, the puddle jumpers, which are just about big enough to go in through a standard gate. So that doesn't really happen in the Milky Way as much. But they had one of the later baddies in SG-1, the Ori. They were actually able to build a supergate that was big enough to send starships from one galaxy to another. That took an awful lot of work to build, though, each supergate. So they're relatively rare by comparison.
Mm-hmm.
But what's also interesting is how like the gates themselves vary, because the Milky Way gates have 9 chevrons, so they can dial Atlantis from the Milky Way, but you can also dial Destiny. That's the ship that's from the cancelled spin-off universe. And I think the gates that were in Stargate Universe, they also had 9 chevrons, so you can actually try to use them to dial back, but I guess the power requirements are a major problem. So, but then in Atlantis, in the Pegasus galaxy, their gates only have 8 chevrons, so they can't dial Destiny, but also there's something about how there's a special control crystal that Atlantis has, and it means that it's the only one that can dial Earth. So the race can't. They'd either have to capture Atlantis with the crystal intact and then use it to dial Earth, or they'd have to basically find some other way of sending ships through hyperspace from the Pegasus to the Milky Way, which for them is trickier because their ships are like biological, so they don't necessarily have the same range in terms of trying to leave their galaxy that other Empire ships have.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Okay, well, actually, even though this is fascinating, it's one not Starfleet universe, but more importantly, it's getting late and time to shut things down because the Lord knows I still got a lot more stuff done because I got sidetracked by other things before the podcast. So certain things I usually get done, like the news portion of the podcast I have not recorded yet. I haven't even created all the news. I have not even gathered it up yet. So I'm going to be up a little later than expected. And as it is, we're stopping this a little later than normally. So with that, I think we will tie this up for this evening. Gary, it's been a pleasure to get sidetracked by your topic.
Well, I'm sure you'll get a chance to talk about the Voodar. Although I will actually leave one final note is if you are talking about the Voodar, you might want to have a look at how their rules are in Fed Commander and but not in Star Matter just yet. Playtest in Star Matter. But yeah, you might be interested to basically compare and contrast how the FedCom rules for Voodar were compared to the SFB ones.
Agreed. I definitely, at the very least, should look at that up myself. Obviously, the big reason I wanted to talk about the Voodar at all was that with the new tournament cruiser, that's now a official tournament cruiser, and that's one thing. Hopefully, Barry will be here next week so we can talk about that, and talk about obviously the other changes to the tournament ships that have been put into play, and they'll be used for the next tournament. So, should be interesting. So, Gary, it's been a pleasure. You have a good night.
Good night, Paul.
Okay. Bye. So, had a nice discussion there with Gary about the different things that are going to be showing up in the captain's log. Obviously, one of those things that is happening in the captain's log is all those wonderful things, but also we got sidetracked talking about, of course, X ships and Andromedans and all that, which is always good food to think about. And so I think it was a good overall night. And just one quick thing, Rush was pointing out that the Starfire universe uses a drone/warp gate comms that are often weeks or months to get messages back to the core planets. Yes, actually, I forgot about that universe because I've read quite a few of the books of the Starfire universe. I have not read the latest books of the Starfire universe because it's been many, many years between that. And it says, and Russ is pointing out for those who aren't watching the video and just listening to the audio, which it says for much of that, the timeline of inter-system comms were laser-based, but there was no method to pass that message to the next system through naturally occurring warp points without a ship or semi-expensive one-use drone transiting the warp point, which to me means that if it was semi-expensive drone, either only certain empires could to do that, or more to the point, it was probably only done in the case of great emergency where it's like help, help, we're being attacked kind of idea. So with that, I am Paul Franz, and I bid you a good night.